So I'm just going to pass it to Isatu Barry.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Housing Court Answers, for letting us speak with you all today. Hi, my name is Isatu Barry. I am a housing attorney working out of the Bronx office of the Legal Aid Society, and I'm going to let my fellow presenters also introduce themselves with you today. Vanessa?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vanessa Pattay. I'm a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society in the Bronx as well. So wonderful seeing you all.
And hi, my name is Casey Lee. I'm also a staff attorney with the Legal Aid in the Bronx office in our tenant defense unit.
All right, everyone. So we're going to get started. We're going to go through the agenda first. We're going to give an overview of the different types of housing vouchers there are. And then we're going to go specifically into talking about two sources of housing vouchers that tenants can actually get on their own. So there are so many different types of vouchers, but the ones that tenants can go and apply for are very limited. After we talk about these types of vouchers, we're going to just talk generally about resources for housing issues and who you should reach out to if you have a housing issue. So I'm going to go over generally what housing vouchers are. So for the types of arrears that you have, you can get ongoing assistance through programs like HASA, through shelter allowance, which is provided through the Human Resources Administration, also known as HRA, through the FEPS program, the Citizeps program, SCREE or DRE, foster care subsidies, the Nycha program, the direct housing through Nycha. And so it's important to remember that for these types of arrears, this is for ongoing assistance, not a one-time assistance. And we're gonna focus on the ones out of these that tenants can apply for directly. Some of these programs can only be received through applying through another program, but we're gonna focus on the ones where you can actually do the work to submit an application.
Thanks, Atsutu. Okay, so there are multiple sources of ongoing sources of rent, which includes shelter allowance. Atsutu just obviously briefly went over that. Shelter allowance is like a basic allowance that HRA gives to recipients who have full public assistance cases. So essentially, to have shelter allowance, you would have to be on public assistance. You would have to go to your local cash assistance office, welfare office, apply not only for just simply, food stamps perhaps, but a full active case. There is FEPS, but FEPS is a program that essentially you can't get FEPS unless you have shelter allowance, unless you have a full public assistance case. So essentially FEPS is a family homelessness and eviction prevention supplement. So the S is definitely emphasized because this is a supplemental subsidy, right? So it supplements the shelter allowance that recipients receive. City FAPS is this program that's similar to FAPS in nature. However, the primary difference, and I'm sorry, let me just go back to FAPS a little bit. FAPS also is a program that's available, a subsidy that's available to those who have minor children in the home. City FEPS is again a similar program, and the city has actually worked to mirror the programs as far as the benefits are concerned. However, one of the primary differences with City FEPS is that it's not necessary to have a public assistance case, and also it's not necessary to have a minor in the home. HASA is a subsidy as well, in which recipients, those who have HIV, they can also apply for a rent subsidy to help with their rent. There's SCREE, there's DRE. These programs essentially just simply freeze the rent at the rent amount at the time of application. So for instance, someone who has a $500 rent, if you apply for the SCREE or DREE rent freeze, then essentially your rent will be frozen at $500 for the duration of your tenancy, so long as you continue to renew your application, or more so renew your these benefits with the Department of Finance. So SCREE is for those who are senior citizens, and then DREE is for those who suffer from varying disabilities. And then there's also the foster care rent subsidy, which is administered through ACS. So where there a household is taking care of a foster child, then they are entitled to a foster care rent subsidy. Again, all of these ongoing sources of rent are through applications and different agencies, essentially. So we can move on to the next slide. So ongoing rent assistance available from New York City HRA, the shelter allowance. So I've given essentially a preview of what it is that these different types of ongoing sources of rent are. So shelter allowance, again, they are payments from HRA to help with rent for households with full cash assistance case. Again, this is different from, you can simply have SNAP. Some people refer to as food stamps. So you can just simply have a food stamps case, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have cash assistance. So where you also have cash assistance, you can also receive, you will also receive shelter allowance. And this can include money that has already been issued on behalf of the tenant that the landlord hasn't received or hasn't cashed. We can go on to the next slide. FEPS. So another ongoing source of rent comes through the FEPS program. Again, this is the Family Homelessness Eviction Prevention Supplement, right? So in order to be eligible for FEPS, you must have a cash assistance case. There must be it must be a family with a minor child. At least one person has a public assistance shelter case in the household, monthly rent and arrears within FEPS limits. So essentially, there are guidelines as to, there are certain limitations on who are eligible for FEPS, on which families are eligible for FEPS. Some of those limitations include, most recently, the program has changed, but so some of the new requirements include the number of bedrooms in the home that you are living or that you would potentially be moving to, the number of people in the household, and the number of people on your cash assistance budget. And then also the utilities, whether or not the landlord is paying the utilities in the apartment does affect the limitations, the rent amount or the subsidy amount that FEPS will pay, and also your eligibility for the FEPS program. So FEPS also pays for instance, if you're already living in a home and you're in rental arrears, but you are eligible for FEPS, essentially, the FEPS program will pay for those rent arrears, those past rent arrears, up to $20,000, and that's only through the remainder of 2022. And they will also be continue paying your ongoing rent. And so again, the 20,000 arrears limitation is something that's new, and it's obviously, if it's not obvious, it's in light of the pandemic. So that's why it is only until the end of 2022, and hopefully, it remains that way, but we're not quite sure. So tenants can seek a FEPS provider to submit the application, and tenants can apply through the 4 ways described. And so we can move on, which we'll talk a little bit more about applying for FEPS. A moment, please. Okay. So applying for FEPS. So there are 4 ways in which someone can apply for FEPS, right? So there's the Hra Mobile App. There's the home visit / homebound for someone who's homebound. There's a paper application, and then there's a scheduled appointment at the center. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so the HRA mobile app. So for those who do receive public assistance, there is a actual app that, you know, everything has an app now, right? And so HRA is absolutely not exempt from this. This is probably one of the things that's moved them forward and made them much more accessible to recipients of benefits. So there is a HRA access called Access HRA mobile app. And if you can apply for certain benefits through this app. So via Access HRA mobile app and document upload app, or the HRA website and delivering documents, you can upload documents through the HRA mobile app, or you can access it online. If this is for the household with income other than cash assistance, you can fill out an application for cash assistance and check off the box for rent arrears and upload identity and rent documents. So again, if you do have rental arrears, it's really super important that you do check off the box that there are rent arrears, so that HRA is aware and that the process can begin for the varying help, rent arrears help. If there is an open cash assistance case, the household must submit a special request for rent arrears on the web or the mobile app and the document upload app. So note wherever you can on the application that you want to be considered for FEPS. So it's super important to make it expressly clear that you do want not only help with your rental arrears, but then also you want help with your ongoing rent, right? Because there is a program, a program called commonly referred to as the one-shot deal. So it's a grant that can be paid to tenants who are in rental arrears. The problem with that is that it's a one-time grant, right? So where you know that you need help with ongoing rent, then it's super important to make it expressly clear at some point during the application with one of the documents that you're uploading that you're looking to apply for the FEPS program. So whether that's simply a blank sheet of paper, you know, and say, I want to apply for FEPS, you know, and you upload that document along with your other qualifying documents, then that should suffice. But it's very important to distinguish between just a one-time help versus FEPS, which again is a subsidy that can help with ongoing rent. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay. So the home visit, if you do have a disability or there's a need for a reasonable accommodation, you can contact the HRA Office of Constituent Services. The number is listed in the slide, as well as the email address. So you could just simply let them know that you want to apply for FEPS. HRA will schedule a home visit or phone appointment, depending on your need. So you have to make sure to ask how long the wait will be before you're called or visited by an HRA agent to start the process. Identify any documents that will need to be copied, labeled, and sent to the center. It's super important, again, for those who are homebound, you do have that option made available to you. Another way of applying is the paper application. So the paper application is essentially, as one can only imagine, it's paper, right? So it's the old-fashioned way. The problem with this is that it does take a little bit longer than some of the other ways, because you do have to obviously get the application sent to you, but then you also have to return it and then have it processed. So the HRA Access HRA app may be best. Again, it can be through the app or it can be web-based. You can log on if you have access to a secure computer, of course, one that you trust, that you can upload documents to through more so. But this, again, is an option for those who don't have access to a computer and or find themselves not to be necessarily the most tech savvy. You can call the HRA info line for a paper application, and the number is listed there, 718-557-1399. or you could just simply download one. Again, this kind of goes back to access to a computer, but there is a website in which you can download the paper application to begin the process. And again, check off the fact that there are rent arrears and they are needed to be addressed. You can ask the HRA info line where to mail, fax, or drop off the application and the supporting documents. And of course, as always, just simply let them know that you are in fact applying for FAPS.
We have a question in the chat. What if you are facing eviction? Can you apply for a voucher even if you do not apply for a one-shot deal?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, what if you're facing eviction? Can you apply for the program even if you do not apply for a one-shot deal?
Yeah, so this is something to apply for in lieu of the one-shot deal. This is like honestly the better option, right? Because essentially it helps pay for not only the rental arrears, but if you do qualify, it'll also help you pay your ongoing rent. So oftentimes people are in arrears. Why? Because there's maybe been a loss of income, or there's just been a change in the household composition that affects the finances of the household makeup. So with that being said, if you know that you need help with ongoing rent, it's definitely advisable to, apply for FAPS. So FAPS instead of a one-shot deal. And sometimes you'll meet resistance. So you have to really stress to the workers that you are in fact applying for FAPS and you do not want a one-shot deal. One of the other ways in which the last ways in which you can apply for FAPS is, this is a last resort, but households can schedule an appointment at an open center, job center in New York City. Job center, welfare center, it's referred to in many different ways. But you can schedule an appointment to meet with an agent, a HRA staff member. So you just simply call the HRA info line to request an appointment. And you can use an HRA self-serve computer to fill out an application and drop off copies of documents in person. So when you get to the appointment, it's not necessarily that you'll meet with someone on first upon arrival, as much as they'll more so guide you to one of the self-serving computers so that you can do the application for the FAPS program yourself. And you should also receive a callback. So after the application is submitted at the HRA center, HRA job center, then you should receive a callback to review the application at home. So, this method isn't necessarily the most encourageable. I will say, some people, again, they'll have questions, maybe they'll have questions, but the agents there aren't necessarily equipped to answer those questions. And sometimes you just want to be able to fill out this application in the comfort of your own home, since you'll be doing the same, at a center instead. But
we have a second question. What if you are subletting? Do you still qualify for the voucher if you're facing eviction?
Well, I mean, you technically can, if you're subletting. I mean, technically, yes, you can. You can be eligible for the FAPS program, but that does bring certain things into question. Essentially, in order to have FAPS, you have to, the old way anyway, or more so pre-pandemic and may potentially resume in 2023, is that you have to be facing a lawsuit or the threat of eviction. The threat of eviction has to exist. So you would have to, in fact, provide proof that you will be evicted from the apartment. So where you're subletting the apartment and your name isn't on any of the documents that, potentially affect, show that in fact someone will be evicted from the home, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. So it really does depend on your, relationship with not only the tenant, who in fact is a tenant of record, but then also your relationship with the landlord. So throughout the remainder of the year, 2022, even a simple rent demand from the landlord will suffice. But again, your name would have to be on that document for the rent versus the tenant of record, or potentially if the tenant of record gives you a rent demand, you're paying your rent to the tenant of record, then that may too suffice. But you'd have to explain that during the time of the application.
We have another question. Can an undocumented person qualify for this type of housing resource?
So technically they can, where there's a minor in the home and that minor is a citizen, right? So for instance, if someone who is undocumented, but they're in the household with, two minor children, they can open a public assistance case for the minor children. And they would be on the budget. However, the subsidy would be for those two, essentially those limitations that I spoke of earlier, including like the number of people in the household, it would be limited to 2 people versus 3 people. So HRA is essentially blind to that undocumented person that's in the household. Okay, so after applying, a worker should be calling you back to review your application. If you do not get a call back within 2 business days, you should definitely call the rescheduling unit at the number that's listed there. It's super important, in the days following the application that you do in fact be on the, I don't want to say be tied to your phone, but you kind of have to be tied to your phone and make sure that you do pick up, even if it's from a number that you don't recognize. If there's no communication after the submission of the application, phone call or anything of the sorts, then you can definitely request a fair hearing. If you get a rejection, or if the application itself is rejected based on, having missed a call or something of the sort, you should definitely request a fair hearing. If you do, in fact, get a rejection, do not wait. You should do that promptly. So next slide.
Okay, so Vanessa kind of covered FEPS, and so this is city FEPS. It is very, very similar in terms of the amount that they will pay for the rent. But this is for people who don't qualify for FEPS. So that could be households that don't have a minor child, households that aren't on a full cash assistance case, but it has certain other requirements. So it's available to people who are veterans, who are current APS, Adult Protective Service clients, or who were formerly homeless or live in a rent-controlled household. The household income still must be below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. And tenants can only apply for this program through a home base in their area. You can call 311 to figure out which home base you should go to. There's also another program that we discussed is called HASA. This is available to individuals who have HIV or AIDS. HASA provides one-stop assistance to people who are eligible. So that can include, this is almost like an enhanced public assistance case. And if you think that you qualify, then you should call this number 212-971-0626, and they should be able to assist you. And the last program that we're really going to discuss in depth is called SCREE and DREE. These are Senior Citizen Rent Income Exemption, and DREE is for if you're receiving a disability related income. What this means is in all of these situations, you need to live in a rent regulated household. So you have to have a rent stabilized or a rent controlled lease. The household income needs to be under $50,000, and you have to spend at least 1/3 of your income on rent. For SCREE, the Senior Citizen Rent Income Exemption, the head of household needs to be at least 62 years old. And for DREE, someone needs to be receiving a disability related income. In order to apply for these programs, we have the links in the slides, but you can also just Google SCREE or DREE initial application, and you should be able to fill out the information and mail it to the Department of Finance. You can also call 311 for more information if you're having any trouble.
We have a question in the chat. I believe it's about Citizeps. Correct me if I'm wrong. The question is there a time limit on homelessness? Meaning, what if you were homeless 2 years ago, but are facing homelessness now?
There's not a time limit, but the requirement is that it's in a New York City homeless shelter. So the HRA basically needs to be able to pull up records on your homelessness. There's another question. There's another question. Oh, yeah.
Is there any Nycha program for senior citizens?
I believe, yes, there is. Oh, I believe there's a wait list for senior citizens that you can apply for, but you can't use SCREE towards Nycha. So if you live in Nycha housing, or if you have a Section 8 lease, you can't use SCREE towards that, because if you have Section 8 of any sort, your rent is automatically 1/3 of your income, whereas SCREE is for, specifically rent regulated housing. I forget though if you can combine SCREE with another voucher. Do you guys know?
With like for instance, like FAPS, or you can.
Yes.
Only with FAPS, but not with Section 8.
Right, just simply
You
not
cannot.
with Section 8.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. So if you are having some housing issues, and if we didn't answer your questions today, then you can call the Legal Aid Society neighborhood office in your borough. Here, the 718 number is for the Bronx office, but otherwise you can also access a citywide housing helpline by calling 311 and asking for the housing helpline. We have it staffed with people who can answer a host of housing issues, and the helpline does not have the income restrictions that we would have in order to help people with their housing court cases. If you're currently homeless, then we also have a homeless rights project, and they have a helpline that's open Monday through Friday. That's the 800-649-9125 number. And you should also feel free to reach out to home-based providers in your borough. Again, you can call 311 or go to the home-based HRA website to find out which office is open nearest you. And yeah, at this point, we're open to questions. I know it went a little fast, but yeah, we're happy to answer any questions you might have. And I think you can also feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself.
Let me ask you a question. How come they only take into account when you have SCREE your rent? What about your utilities bill? You must have cable. The television doesn't operate unless you have cable. And you have to pay for your cell phone. Everybody has to have a cell phone, and some seniors have a landline, and they only take into account your rent when they go by 1/3 for giving you the SCREE.
Unfortunately, we do not live in a perfect world. And, as legal services providers, we are aware of the other, not incidental, but, other expenses that are just required to survive. And unfortunately, this is just the best that the city can do for rent assistance. I think we also mentioned the one-shot deals a little bit tangentially. If you do fall into arrears on some of your utilities, the one-shots can also be used towards those as well. But yeah, SCREE is just something, basically, if you're on a fixed, SCREE and Drea are available if you're on a fixed income and meet all of the other metrics. I should also have mentioned that with those programs, they aren't like the other programs that we mentioned. They're not like Citizeps or FEPS, in that those programs pay directly to your landlord, whatever the supplement is, whereas SCREE and Drea are paid out in terms of tax credits. So I think it's on a quarterly basis. But yes, I know it's not perfect, Ms. Kelly. We all know that.
In the chat, we have a question for FEPS. Does the total household income have to be below 200% of the federal poverty line? The answer to that is yes. So not only does it have to be under 200%, but the household needs to also be eligible for cash assistance. So that's way under 200% of the federal poverty level. So if the household, so what we call cash assistance, a lot of people call welfare. So if the household is receiving welfare, then they would be eligible for FEPS if there is a minor in the household. And then Melba asks for the phone number. Yes, Melba, could you please clarify which phone number you're referring to? Thank you. The next question is, what do you recommend for a tenant who is not in arrears yet, but would like a subsidy because monthly income is lower than rent? Would they be eligible for shelter allowance if they apply for cash assistance? Absolutely. If they qualify for cash assistance, they are eligible for shelter allowance. But I will clarify that those shelter allowance amounts are really, really small. So they are still expected to cover the majority of their rent. But shelter allowance does pay for a little bit. So Melba, I'm gonna go back to the slide that lists for our homeless rights units. I also see that Ashgan Yassin has raised their hand. If you could unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. So I have a client that recently got a City Fast voucher, but I don't know if it's related or I can ask that question, but I was wondering if there's a way like HRA can help her find an apartment.
HRA doesn't help with finding apartments, but if your client has a Citizeps voucher, then they probably got it through a home base or a homeless shelter. Sometimes those shelters or those home base have lists, or they have names of brokers that they work with, because certain brokers will be more open to taking Citizeps. I do want to clarify that it is illegal for a landlord to say that they are not going to take programs like Citizeps, FEPS, and Section 8. So you do have a client that is in that situation, then reach out to HRA, because they do have a source of income discrimination unit and they can help with that piece. But unfortunately, there's not really the best list of apartments and sources like that. I think that's the thing that a lot of communities are looking for. But sometimes the home base do have a list of brokers or landlords in the area that take the Citizeps voucher or are more open to doing so. No problem. Sarah asks, can FEPS and Citizeps be combined with DRE and SCREE? The answer is yes, they can be. So if a person has either FEPS or Citizeps, they can also have either DRE or SCREE. The way that would work is the FEPS program would cover everything but the DRE or SCREE amount, which would be covered or which would be reduced because of the program. We also have a question from Wendy De Leon.
Yes, hello. I wanted to ask about people who are in HPD shelters. I've worked with some families in HPD shelters and tried to refer them to home base, and were told that because they are in an HPD shelter, they wouldn't qualify for rental assistance. I'm wondering if there's any program that you are aware of that they could apply for.
So normally if someone, Vanessa, did you have something? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, for instance, Citizeps is a program that's meant to help, especially those who are in shelters, transition into, housing outside of the shelter. But unfortunately, it is limited to DHS shelters and not HPD shelters. As for other programs, I mean, if they are in fact eligible, for instance, cash assistance or, public assistance, just generally, from there, if they are eligible for the other programs, Citizeps, through other means, outside of just merely the DHS shelter history, or for FEPS, then they would be able to apply for those subsidies.
I will say additionally that if someone is in an HPD shelter, they might have access to an application for HPD Section 8. So like I said at the beginning, Section 8 is not a program that tenants can just apply for. They have to be working with an organization that has access to those types of programs. HPD shelters do have access to HPD Section 8 vouchers.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know because sometimes we do come across staff that's either not up to date with some of the policies that those programs have, and you get some pushback. So it's always good to have some of the resources, and I know with legal aid, it's very trusted information. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the question. Our next question is, does bad credit scores come into play for receiving Citizeps? They should not, absolutely not. So this kind of goes along with what I said with landlords are not allowed to do source of income discrimination, right? They are not allowed to discriminate against you solely because of your credit score or solely because of the fact that you are applying with Citizeps. If you do have an issue with that, call 311 because they do try to hold the landlords accountable for these types of discriminatory actions. The next question is there a time limit for when the tenant had to have been homeless in New York City shelter? For example, if a tenant who was 21 had been homeless in a New York City shelter when they were 10 years old, could they still be eligible for Citizeps on the basis of having been in shelter? Absolutely, yes. I actually had a case where my client was applying for FEPS. They rejected her application. We were shocked and they said, no, she had been in a shelter when she was 2 years old. She did not remember. So organizations like Homebase have access to the DHS system that has a list of who has been in the homeless shelters. Now that list doesn't necessarily go into the 80s, or I would even say early 90s, but there is a list out there. And if the individual has some other type of paper proof for before that electronic list was created, that would be very helpful to them. You're welcome, Genesee. Thank you for clarifying on shelter allowance eligibility. Would they apply for cash assistance regularly, or is there a specific part to answer this for shelter allowance? So yeah, they would apply for cash assistance regularly. So when someone applies for cash assistance, under that, they ask, are you applying for food? Do you need assistance with food? Do you need assistance with shelter? Do you need assistance with utilities? So they list a bunch of things under that cash assistance application part. So they would they would check off the shelter allowance. They would see that option to apply for shelter. For Citizeps, is it true that everyone in the households have to have some type of documentable income? How is the subsidy amount calculated usually? So yes, it's true that everyone over the age of 18 in the household has to have some documentable income. For households where there is an adult who is not working, that person has to get on cash assistance, has to get on the welfare program, right? The subsidy amount is usually calculated, I think it's 30% of the income, but it's also based on the cash assistance chart. So normally they will ignore income that is Social Security income, but they won't ignore Social Security disability income, right? So there's also little special rules that they have there. If someone does have is trying to figure out if what their Citizeps share, what their Citizeps rent might be, they can work with their home-based caseworker to try and figure that number out, because that's the person who will know the most up-to-date information on how Citizeps is going to calculate the rent. Tamasha asks, is there any program for people that are blind for housing? I don't know of any specific programs. I do believe that that individual would be eligible for DRE. But Casey or Vanessa, I don't know of any programs specifically.
I don't know. Yeah.
Oh,
Nothing specific, unless you have, so if that person is blind with Social Security or disability or disability income, then they could be eligible for DRE because that's a fixed income.
And I just want to say thank you so much for having us. I do have to go, but Asatu and Casey will definitely be available for the remainder of the program. Thank you.
Any other questions? These are great, excellent questions. Please let us know. Feel free to raise your hand too. For FEPS and Citizeps, does the tenant need a 1-year rental agreement from the landlord to show to be eligible for the program? So if they are in an apartment that is rent controlled or rent stabilized, they do not need a 1-year lease, because the way that the law works for rent controlled and rent stabilized apartments is that there are automatic renewals. So that person is guaranteed to live there past 1 year. If they live in an unregulated apartment, so that comes more with like a 2-family home, right? If they are a roommate, if they're subletting, right? They would need proof of that. So if they are in unregulated housing, like a 2-family home, they would need a 1-year lease. If they are a roommate or if they are subletting, they might need a lease, proof of someone's name on that lease, and also a letter from the person who's allowing them to stay there, saying that they will allow them to stay there for 1 year. So those are the requirements. Most people who apply for FEPS are rent stabilized. So they do have that, they do not have to show that they have a 1-year lease. But if they live in unregulated housing, like I said, like a family home, if they're roommates or if they're subletting, they will need proof that they can stay in the apartment for a year. Can we speak with any of you one-on-one? So the way that legal aid works is we run the 311 helpline. So our colleagues are running that helpline. And so if you call 311, you will get to a legal aid advocate who will be able to answer all of your questions. I believe it's 9 to 5. Yeah, it's 9 to 5. So they will be able to answer any of your questions about housing. And if you do have a case, they may be able to help you figure out how to get an attorney. Or if you have questions about Citizeps or FEPS, they can help you figure out how to get to the right place to deal with that program, apply for that program, etc. Can you receive DRE if you are undocumented? Casey, do you know the answer to that question?
I was actually just looking that up.
Mm.
I think the issue with DRE is that you need to be on a federal disability assistance program. And so that may preclude you from DRE. The household may still be eligible for DRE if one person is undocumented though. Someone in the household needs to have DRE or disability income.
Right. So for example, I've seen examples where there is a child in the household who is receiving SSI, but for some reason, the household is not eligible for FEPS. They are eligible for FEPS. They might also be eligible for DRE. Sorry, give me 1 second. Thank you for all of these great questions. What if you have a roommate? Does Citizeps cover that? yes, Citizeps does cover situations in which there is a roommate. There is still an income limit on that roommate, though. The roommate also has to be making less than 200% of the federal poverty level. And also the share will be divided by the individuals, right? So they're not going to cover all of the rent. They're going to cover the part of the rent that belongs to the person who's applying to Citizeps. And then a home-based caseworker can help you figure out what that looks like as well, specifically. Wendy, I see that your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. You may have covered this and I simply missed it, but some of the families we've worked with that have Citizeps have reported that it's difficult for them to move if they're living in a situation where the landlord's not doing repairs, or simply if they've found a better location or a better apartment, that there's pushback from home base to move. And I wondered if there's any particular policy about that, or is just people not wanting to do paperwork.
Yeah, I think that so my understanding of Citizeps is the only way you can move is to get a transfer voucher from the home base. The way that I understand that most home bases operate is that they will only provide that transfer voucher if there are extreme repairs. And when I say extreme, I mean it, like really, really bad repair, unlivable to an extreme sense repairs, or if there is a danger of domestic violence in the household. I have not seen a lot of or if there's a court case, if there's a housing court case against the tenant. But other than that, I have not seen situations where home base is providing a transfer voucher. And I don't think they do it often. And I think it's limited to those specific circumstances because programs like VEPS and Citizeps were created so that people can remain in the community. The idea is you don't want to displace a family that has been here for 20, 30 years. You want to make sure that the children still have access to their schools, still have access to their family members that may live by. So unfortunately, like a moving voucher goes against the ideas behind the program. But yeah, it's definitely as difficult as you're describing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate because we helped so many families apply for like Housing Connect, and typically these are newer apartments, though not necessarily bigger, but definitely newer apartments, and tend to be in better condition, especially for someone leaving shelter. It's the idea that a lot of the families come across is take it or leave it. This is what we found. Yeah, it's better than being the shelter. You need it, but those aren't necessarily the best. The apartments in the best condition are the best communities, or the safest communities, I should say. So, we do have families that, after living there a year, are looking to move out, and so there's some pushback about that. But knowing the kind of justifications that they accept is really helpful.
Yeah, I know that's really hard, and it is possible for a household to forfeit their Citizeps, right? And maybe find another way or another voucher if they qualify for maybe FEPS, right? But I know that makes it harder in the Housing Connect process to prove that you're eligible to live there and pay the rent and all of that stuff. But yeah, it's a tricky situation, definitely.
Yeah, I could just have a second question. Regarding Citizeps and time limit. So with Citizeps, initially it was 5 years that people were getting the voucher for, and is it now until the youngest child ages out, or?
So for FEPS, for FEPS and Citizeps, yes, there is a 5-year limit. For FEPS, it's whichever is sooner, the youngest child aging out or the 5 years. For Citizeps, it's the 5 years. But what we have seen is that the city that administers FEPS and HRA from getting money from the state to administer FEPS and the city administering city FEPS has not, and I don't want to jinx it, but they have not stuck to that 5-year limit. But they do have that written in the law. They do have a right to take it back after 5 years. But Wendy, I don't want to like jinx it, but we have not seen them do that at all. Never.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Knock on wood.
Yes,
Gotcha.
exactly. I will get to you, Melba, but I just wanted to answer the next question in the chat. Can a tenant apply for FEPS or city FEPS with a lease in a family member's name? Their name is not on the lease, but a family member's name is on the lease. Yes, they can, but they do need that additional. So they would be as a roommate. They would be considered a roommate, no matter how close they are in family, they would be considered a roommate. And as a roommate, they need a letter from the person whose name is on the lease, from the tenant of record who is on the lease, saying that they are allowed to live there in that apartment for 1 year. So that's what they would need. Melba Cruz?
Yes, hello. I just have a quick question since we're talking about vouchers. So there's a client that I know, basically the issue is the client does have city FEPS, but she received a letter from her landlord, a very nice letter. I say nice because, you know, it spoke highly of the tenant, the client, and it was just asking that the client moves by April 30th. So, I mean, they don't owe any rent. It's just that they're going to sell the house. So if they don't sell by that date, it seems that it won't go through the agreement. So I'm just wondering, the client did try to reach out to an attorney in housing court, and they told them, the attorney mentioned that they wouldn't qualify for any legal like referral or anything like that. What would you recommend?
They have to go to a home base with that letter and show that letter to the home base and get the transfer voucher. So because this is one of the examples that the landlord is selling the building, because what the landlord is doing is they're setting up for a case. So in order to start a case, the landlord first has to send that letter. If what is requested in that letter isn't done, then they might have to send another letter, but eventually they're allowed to start a case. So to start a case, a landlord needs to send a couple of letters. So that seems like what might be happening here. I would definitely have them go to a home base. And if you call 311, you can find what home base works for their zip code. But because it's like, this is what happens right before the landlord starts a case, it's very important that your client starts making the moves. They would definitely get more time if they were in court requesting with their attorney and requesting more time from the judge. They would get some time, but it sounds like this landlord wants to sell, and sometimes the judges do take that into consideration. So I would do two things. I would have your client start looking now, and I would have your client schedule an appointment with the home base to apply.
I'm sorry, I should have cleared that. The client is with home base because I work for home base. It's just you know, we're just concerned, about the legal part, like because it seems that they want an attorney like to advise them. And they're not able. I mean, they spoke to an attorney, but they want representation. I mean, they don't qualify, right? Because
there's no case. There's no case. And honestly, they don't want a case, right? They want to be able to solve this by getting that transfer voucher and
we're working on that.
So because a case is just, not, a headache, but also like they don't need the stress of a case so I think you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, but because they're not in court, they don't qualify for legal representation. But if they do have any other questions, or if they do need to hear that from someone else, they can call 311 and talk to one of our housing advocates.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem. I just want to make sure I haven't missed. Okay. Does the roommate's income have to be included in the total household income that has to be under 200% to qualify for FEPS and CityFEPS, or is that their income alone also as to be under 200% of the federal? It's separate. So it's like two households living under two households living under the same roof. So if it's like the roommate and their two children and your client and their one child, each household needs to be under 200%. So it's separate. You do not need to be worried, sorry about that, about it being all together.
Thank you so much.
Next, are the ceilings or limits that correspond to household size for, yeah, there are ceilings and limits. So, right, the FEPS and CityFEPS programs have gone through a big change recently, where they have increased the limits, but they have also associated those limits now with room size, like number of rooms. And so you can get those numbers specifically by just Googling FEPS or CityFEPS. You will see a chart there. They will have the charts available. But like Vanessa was explaining before, there's also the issue of utilities. So the limits, the ceilings are based off of the number of rooms that a household might need, and if the utilities are included or not included in the rent. So you can see those limits on the FEPS or the CityFEPS website. If you Google it, it should be the first thing that pops up, and they have charts there that will tell you what those limits are. The next question, no problem. Any other questions? Wendy?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about the cases we have. I wondered, thank you. I wondered, in a situation where a family's living in an apartment in a private home, and the home is in process of, I got the word escapes me now, but the owner's losing the house, basically. It's
foreclosure.
Foreclosure, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, they're in foreclosure. The tenant has a subsidy. Now, the subsidy continues to pay, right? Because it's a monthly, it's set up by computer, just monthly spitting out the payments.
Yes.
What should the tenant do in that case? Because once it's in foreclosure, the tenant has stopped paying rent. There's no one to really pay rent to at that point. And obviously they don't want to lose the subsidy by not having a home itself or an apartment itself that the payment can go to.
Of course. You said that they have, what subsidy do they have?
Well, I have one that has Section 8, and then there's one that has CityFEPS.
Right. So for both, they need to apply for transfer vouchers. And if they have any of the foreclosure documents, they need to bring those foreclosure. For Section 8, they should contact the administrator, right? So if it's HPD, if it's Nycha, they with the foreclosure document. And this is another situation in which someone can easily get a transfer voucher. And then when they are doing that, they also request that payments be stopped. So I would suggest that they wait until they get their transfer voucher to request that payments be stopped, right? But sometimes that process cannot overlap in the way that we want it to. But those are the two steps that they're expected to take. Because with that transfer voucher, that's proof that they're still on the program and they're still eligible, because we know administrative errors can happen. So that's why I would use that. Casey, did you have anything else you wanted to?
I think with the foreclosure, it's a complicated process, right? So yeah, well, I mean, we typically don't see the foreclosure cases in the housing practice, and the cases that we do see once they actually hit the housing practice are when the bank has already taken possession, and then the bank is the one that's actually evicting the tenant. So yeah, it can take a long time, and that's actually the perfect situation when you should request the voucher and get the client out.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Melba, did you have another question? Just double checking. Sarah asked if the Section 8 waitlist is closed. Yes, it is. And it's a little bit complicated to get access to a Section 8 voucher at this time. And it's really hard for me to say anything that's like supportive or encouraging about that. I don't know if Casey, you have anything, but yeah.
I think the only thing that we would say about the Section 8 waitlists are if you can access them, you should apply for them, but you also shouldn't rest your hope in them. I feel like we've had a couple, every once in a while, clients will come to us and say, oh, you know, I am trying to move out. I applied for a Section 8. I'm on the Section 8 waitlist. If you're my client and you're in housing court, that Section 8 waitlist means nothing. It will take far longer and the court case will proceed much, much faster. Like a housing court case might take a couple of months, whereas the voucher, people have been on there for over a decade. So it's good to apply for, but it's not something to rest your faith in. Like you need to actively be working with a broker or, you know, going to apartments and trying to find something on your own.
Thanks, Casey. The next question we have is, in a non-payment case, if Citizeps or FEPS stops paying or the landlord does not receive the monthly portion that FEPS and Citizeps is supposed to pay, is the tenant legally liable for Citizeps and FEPS portion of the monthly rent? So legally, yes, because they are the tenant, but if they are still recipients of Citizeps and FEPS, then the first step is to reach out to the job center where where their cash assistance case is connected to. And for Citizeps also, the job center that's closest to them, because that's who is administering the checks. So they will be able to handle any situation, whether it's checks that got lost in the mail, the wrong address for the landlord, checks that went to a different landlord, or yeah. So they are liable, yes, they are responsible for it, but it's an easier fix than other types of non-payment issues in that they should be able to reach out to the job center and the job center should be able to solve that problem immediately if they are still recipients of the program. Any other questions?
For Drea, does the person who's applying for Drea have to be the one that is receiving Social Security disability? Can it be someone else, like a child who's receiving Social Security disability?
It can be. It has to be someone in the household who is, and it's usually a familial relationship. But yeah, Casey.
I'm actually looking at the Drea
is it
tool.
different? Mm-hmm.
I think you have to be the tenant of record.
For Drea.
Well, so if you go on to, if you just Google Drea or SCREE eligibility, they have a rent freeze eligibility tool. And it looks like the first criteria is that you need to be listed on the lease or the rent order.
So you have to be on the lease. For SCREE, you need to be the tenant of record. For Drea, I'm pretty sure you do not need to be the tenant of record, but you have to be on the lease. So that could be the partner of the tenant of record. That could be the adult child or the minor child of the tenant of record, but you have to be normally listed as an occupant on the lease.
Gotcha, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Any other questions?
Can I have like a very specific case. Can I ask for a recommendation?
Sure.
Hi, I'm Sarah. So I'm working with a couple who has been together for many years and they're in a family shelter, but they are not legally married. They don't have a domestic partnership. And are there any options for them besides either moving to separate single men's and women's shelters and then applying for vouchers as single people, or getting married, getting a domestic partnership, waiting for that paperwork to go through, and then applying for vouchers as a couple?
You don't need to show what your relationship is for Citizeps.
Okay.
It can be a 2-adult household.
Okay. Great.
I'm pretty sure you don't need a familial relationship for Citizeps.
I think in terms of the shelter though.
Yeah, the shelters might have different rules. We work out of people who are not going through the shelters. So actually what I would suggest is call our homelessness rights unit, because they will know better what the rules are for people coming from the shelter.
Okay. Thank you. And then one of the partners was told by his parole officer that there's like a special kind of voucher that the DOC provides just for people who've been incarcerated for a certain amount of time. It's my understanding that you have, for that subsidy, you have to have been released from prison in the past, like recently. Do you all know about that, and if that's true?
I don't, but
okay.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, but I do not know about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Now I'm gonna look it up. Wendy?
Yes, I just wanted to mention, I know that this wasn't what you were covering in your presentation today, but OPWDD, the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, also has a housing subsidy. So obviously you have to be OPWDD eligible in order to receive it, but if there is someone in the household who's an adult and who has OPWDD eligibility, that may be something to consider and discuss. I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Sarah?
Hi. So the question I had is for undocumented folks, when they're applying for FEPS or Citizeps or FEPS or Citizeps, like how does their income get, or does their income get calculated? Well, actually, that's not what I mean. So would it be that they have to pay a certain share, like they would have to be excluded from the case? For example, if their children are citizens, but they're undocumented, and they would, because I know with Nycha, for example, like they would have to pay like a different share than the rest of the household.
Absolutely. Excellent question. And yes, you are correct. They are excluded from the household, and their income is counted, what we like to say, dollar for dollar. So every dollar counts. And then the way that Citizeps and FEPS will normally work is that they pay what's called their pro rata share. So that pro rata share is like, if there are 5 people in the household, they will pay 1/5, while the other people in the household will pay the amount that's connected to their Citizeps household share. So yes, they are counted dollar for dollar.
Gotcha. Thank you. And that applies for Scree and Drea as well?
No, for Scree and Drea, it's more of a rent freeze. So it's taking.
Sorry. I should have been more clear on this.
Yeah.
So a rent freeze, it means that, like, let's say that your rent this year is $1,000. You can apply for either program, and if you're accepted, again, if you live in, it's only for people who live in rent regulated housing. It will freeze your rent, the rent that you pay to the landlord, at $1,000. So you know, the rent increases are usually like 2.5–3% each year. All of those, any of those increases, so long as you're still enrolled in the program, will be paid by the city in the form of a tax credit. The tenant's rent that they pay will remain $1,000 so long as they're enrolled.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Ashkan?
Yes. I have a client that I recently got, and they don't have any type of documentation, and they don't have children. But they are a victim of domestic violence, so they're in process of trying to speak to a lawyer to try to get the VAWA program. Can they apply to any program like SNAP or housing?
So if they get admitted for VAWA, they should get a green card. And if they get a green card, they will be eligible to get a social security number. So all of the HRA type programs, what you need is a social security number to get it. That's one way that citizenship is proven. Casey, I don't know if you have any other resources available, but I think that's what it is.
I think it's not necessarily a social security number, but I guess HRA, don't they also view people as like PRU-call, permanently residing under color? Yeah, so so you don't necessarily need to go as far in the process of as getting a social security number, but if they do report the domestic violence and cooperate with authorities, then they can also, so they can get the T visa.
Yes, or U visa.
Yeah.
If they're cooperating with authorities.
If they're cooperating with authorities, then they can get a U visa and then apply for the green card. And so in HRA's mind, then you will be permanently residing under color of law. So that means that they have a right to stay in the United States, and then that should make them eligible for HRA's plethora of services.
Right. So even if like their VAWA application is being processed, but at some point in time, USCIS gives them the right to stay while their VAWA application is being processed. Like sometimes people get work authorizations, but they don't get a green card. That would make her eligible for all of the social services.
Would that make them eligible for the emergency housing voucher, if you know?
I think it should, but the emergency housing voucher, I honestly don't know a lot about it because it's like still being, because it's still being like decided, right? Like what ultimately will the law will be. But there is nothing that I've heard about it so far that makes me think it won't, the person won't be eligible for that if they had all of those other requirements. Does Citizeps also cover rent arrears as well? Yes, it does. And right now it's similar to FEPS where they are covering up to $20,000 through the end of this year, temporarily because of COVID related issues. Anything else? Sarah?
For a PEPS or Citizeps voucher, if I know that right now they don't have to have court cases but like just a rent demand would do. What about like a predicate notice, like a 30 or 60, 90-day no predicate notice?
Right.
Would that be because I know they're not asking for money. The landlord, like it could be like a no grounds holdover, so it's not necessarily about money. Would that be like sufficient to show for a FEPS or Citizeps?
Unfortunately, no. I know I'm like nodding my head, but unfortunately, no. It's only for non-payments. So this special exception is carved out only for non-payments.
Okay.
But we're hoping to advocate for them to include holdovers and for them to stop that limit. But right now, it's only for non-payments.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we can wrap up now. It was such a pleasure to speak with all of you. Excellent questions. I hope this was helpful. And always feel free to contact legal aid advocates at 311. We're running that helpline. So it was our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming to do the presentation. We appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.